Welcome to First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis, the birthplace of Congregational Humanism. We carry on that tradition of free thought today, dedicated to promoting a free search for truth, meaning, and justice. Our web address is firstunitarian.org. I'm David Breeden, Senior Minister. Welcome.
Good morning, everyone. I'm the Reverend Jim Fody. I'm one of the assistant ministers here, and welcome to the multi-platform Sunday Assembly of the First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis for February 6, 2022. It's our third reopening. We got this down, right? Whether you are here in person or joining us online, we are glad to have you as part of our Unitarian Universalist Humanist community. A few reminders for those of us gathered here on site. Masks are required, except for those of us speaking on stage. And following CDC recommendations, we strongly encourage the use of N95 or K95 masks to limit the spread of COVID. We ask that you maintain distance from the tech booth so that our folks back there can stay safe. And after assembly, we ask that you exit pretty quickly and go downstairs if you wish to socialize. There will be coffee available this week. A quick note about the music. As part of being extra safe, we are in an instrumental mode with no singing and no wind instruments at this time. But we got plenty of talent with this crew right here, so we're going to be just fine. Folks watching online, we are grateful you chose to join us this morning, and we encourage you to connect and comment in the chat. We won't be having an online coffee hour this week because we're having an in-person one, but there is still plenty going on in our FUS community. The Friday Update email offers up-to-date listings of events, happenings, and ways to connect in person and online. You can also check out our freshly redesigned website for many ways to get more involved in our congregational community. The website is at the same longtime address, www.firstunitarian.org. Our assembly theme for February is Widening the Circle, and today we begin with some brief words written by the Reverend Dr. David Breeden. This reading was chosen by Soul Matters to be distributed to congregations across the country this month. It's called In the Circle. We gather into this circle of care to dream, to envision, to embody and achieve the compassion we dream, the justice we envision, the dignity of each in an ever-growing circle of love and justice. Come, let us gather into community. Each week when we gather, we light our chalice, which is a symbol of our Unitarian Universalist heritage. And today we light our chalice remembering the First Unitarian Society aspiration to pursue wisdom through reason, science, art, and the stories of civilizations. Thank you, Paul. Please join me in reading our Congregational Covenant. Love is the spirit of this place, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. Thank you.
In 1881, the founders of First Unitarian Society stated their purpose: to form an association where people, without regard to theological differences, may unite for mutual helpfulness in intellectual, moral, and religious culture and humane work. Thanks to the generosity and time, talent, and treasure of our members and friends, we continue that mission today, promoting a free search for truth, meaning, and justice in a congregational humanist community that is democratically governed and self-supporting. Help support our unique mission by giving today at our website, through PayPal, or the new Vanco mobile app. Thank you.
I'm Bob Adderhold, president of the Foundation of First Unitarian Society, once again here to introduce a Pearson Grant recipient. As you'll recall, the foundation announced its 2021 Kurt Pearson Social Concerns Fund grants in December. These totaled approximately $9,000 and were granted to 6 nonprofit organizations. This week, I want to introduce you to Jody Miller-Grun from Compassionate Action for Animals, one of the recipients. Jody's going to say a few words about her organization and the work our Pearson Grant is funding. Over the next few weeks, you'll be hearing from the remaining grant recipients. Before I turn it over to Jody, though, I want to mention that the Pearson Fund's mission is to support nonprofit organizations doing the social justice work in our community that Kurt Pearson cared so deeply about. The fund was created by Mibs and Perry Pearson to honor the life and memory of their dear son, who died of AIDS at age 29. Since inception 31 years ago, the fund has grown to almost $100,000 and has distributed about $50,000 in grants. Here's Jody to tell you more.
And just want to take a moment to thank you so very much for this really generous grant. So many of us, there are only a few staff people at Compassionate Action for Animals, and many of us actually do more volunteer work than we actually get paid for because this work is so important to us. So we are so grateful and thank you from the bottom of our hearts. It really makes us feel seen, and it's just so appreciated. So thank you all. So yes, I work for Compassionate Action for Animals as the director of a program called Wholesome Minnesota. A little background on Compassionate Action for Animals. The goal, the mission actually for Compassionate Action for Animals, we also call it CAA, is to embrace empathy and compassion towards animals and move towards a more plant-based diet. Or lifestyle. So that would, the work then is, really doing outreach, encouraging community to gather and to understand kind of the plight of animals, and also sort of the plight of what our farm systems are doing to the environment and to human health. That's kind of where my organization or my program comes in. Wholesome Minnesota is an organization where we focus on institutional change. So while our individual actions make a huge difference and really reflect our values, institutional change shows what we value as a society. And so one of the things that I am doing is very specifically reaching out to institutions to attempt to get more plant-based options in institutional food. When I say institutions, that could be anything from hospitals, nursing homes, correctional facilities, and very specifically what I have focused on due to the pandemic are public schools. There are about 7 billion meals served in public schools a year. That's a lot of food. And if you think of the impact that makes on our environment and on human health, it's huge, especially because these are our little people who are going to become big people someday, who we can either enhance their health or hurt it by what we serve them. A lot of kids, the food and the meals that they get at school are might be the only meal they actually get. Could also be the only meal that actually has some fresh fruits, vegetables, things that actually don't come in a package. So I'm working very diligently with a handful of volunteers to bring awareness around the destruction of factory farming and what it has done to the environment, and what the overconsumption of meat products do to human health. We are not a you must do this kind of organization. What we do is we try to meet people where they are. So it's any change, any small incremental change is a big difference. So in terms of institutions, we work with them to try to just make an option, give everybody an option to just choose a plant-based meal if they are considering their impact on the environment, or if they do want to kind of look at their health a little bit. Everyone does better if they have options, and we all do better if we have choices. So that's a big part of it. And so we work specifically with other national organizations because we are so small. We work with national organizations and utilize a lot of resources and guides that they have in place and bring those to Minnesota and implement them with some of the institutions. Our first win actually was with Richfield Public Schools, where they have signed a pledge to go 20% plant-based by 2025, which is huge because they went from 0 to 20%. And we'll take it, we love it. And that's kind of the goal as we approach lots of different school districts. We're also working very specifically with youth and green teams to really encourage them to look at their choices, because those kids are already doing the work. They're already recycling, they're already composting. A lot of them don't know about the food system. So it's really bringing the education in and showing them what further impacts they can have by making their choices and encouraging their schools to do the same. So that's a quick overview. I would also be super happy to come in and chat with anybody or a group of people that would be interested in learning more about the organization. We've got a lot of great resources and fun challenges and things like that we do. And I love to spread the word. I'm super passionate about this work, and thank you so much for funding us.
On Sundays when we gather, we take a few minutes to reflect on the joys, sorrows, and milestones of the human experience. We do this so that we stay in touch with our own humanity. We do this to remind ourselves of the value of a moment of stillness. And we do this so that no one among us is alone in celebrating joy or in facing the burdens of life. This morning, we take a moment to mourn and rage over the death of Amir Locke, the latest black man to be killed by police in Minnesota. There is much we could say about this. At the same time, there is almost nothing new to say. Once again, another person who should be alive has been killed, and another family grieves. Once again, systems that were originally created to police black and brown bodies and to protect white wealth and property are doing what they were designed to do. Leaders who are deeply invested in maintaining those systems are responsible for these same deadly results. And as citizens, so are we responsible. May our tears and anger and lamentations lead to the kind of radical reimagining we need for all of us to live free of violence, fear, and death. We now take a moment of silence to reflect on all the challenges and heartbreak going on in our lives and in our world. And we think with gratitude of all those who are living lives of justice, service, and compassion. Let us now share a moment of silence.
thought all animals arrived here unrelated. The world began and then came man, all perfectly created. But then someone looked up a tree and said that monkey looks just like me. So it really was a mystery, what I'd learned in natural history. So I joined HMS Beagle, watched the eagle and the seagull. We studied rocks and plants, flowers, trees and bees and ants. Slept on hammocks without pillows, eating rats and armadillos, till I realized on reflection, it's natural selection. Natural selection means each animal evolved to blend with its surroundings. Changes were involved. So birds with different foods to seek soon had developed different beaks, and over time they'd modified, so just the fittest of them all survived. On the Isles of Galapagos, I noted that giant tortoise had interesting shells, and I rode on them as well. Iguanas learned and swimming meant my new theory was winning. It all led in the direction of natural selection. My findings met with outrage from the Church of England and from me. The idea that we came from chimps questioned my own Christianity, but it was hard to disagree. Every species' new mutation had a perfect explanation. It seemed the world's inception must predate common perception, and in lack of adaptation is a fatal limitation. So each creature's imperfection over time gets a correction, meaning animal collections grow unique means of protection, and to fail nature's inspection means immediate projection, which all leads to the detection of natural selection. Natural selection.
Your stewardship team is excited to launch the fiscal year 2022-2023. Here is a message from your stewardship team. The past year, for all of us, has been a challenging one. We've sailed through the past 12 months relatively smoothly from a budgeting and programming perspective, but not without challenges, not without some rough waters adjusting in person and virtually for programming and Sundays together. Ted Lasso says, quote, "Taking on a challenge is a lot like riding a horse, isn't it? If you're comfortable while you're doing it, you're probably doing it wrong," end quote. Likely the last 12 months has been uncomfortable for many of us. And with the discomfort of navigating through some rough waters, there have been moments of sunshine. We'll share those moments of sunshine throughout the campaign as we look to solidify financial planning for fiscal year 2022-2023. Please check your mailbox for your pledge form and complete it and get it back to us today. A reading this morning from a very fine book, Darwin's Sacred Cause. Reimagining Darwin because his letters had, oddly enough, never really been collected systematically. So we're learning a lot about Darwin even now. Darwin was the most gentlemanly gentleman anyone had ever met. He was diffident, afraid to ruffle feathers, at home with the conservative Anglican dons, wanting only his own quiet vicarage lifestyle away from the urban tumult and religious harangues. The dons he emulated detested a bestial human evolution so hysterically that the Cambridge cleric who taught him geology
talked of stamping out with, quote, an iron heel upon the head of that filthy abortion evolution, end quote. Yet even as Darwin listened to his mentors after the Beagle voyage, he was privately musing on a missing link. How could this be? What drove him to deny the cherished tenets of his privileged Christian society? Surely it had to be some overwhelming impulse that outweighed all others, pitching Darwin into the words and deeds that frightened even him. People have been looking in the wrong place for the answer. With the opening up of Darwin's treasure trove of unpublished papers over the past generation, the clues began to appear. Some were even there in his most famously little red book, The Descent of Man and Selection in Relation to Sex, to give its full and telling title. But this was the end point of Darwin's journey, and its contents have so confused readers that they even now call it two books on two different subjects, sex and ancestry, and so miss the point entirely. Darwin's human project remains obscure, but it is foundational, and without understanding it, we cannot understand why Darwin came to evolution at all. Roots is where we begin. Roots, as in Alex Haley's stirring historical novel, The Enslavement of Black Africans that so outraged Darwin's generation. It was Darwin's starting point, too, his abhorrence of racial servitude and brutality, his hatred of the slaver's desire, as he jotted, to, quote, make the black man another kind, subhuman, a beast to be chained, end quote. Roots were what Darwin's human project was all about. And to understand why he started thinking about the roots, the origin of black and white races, we have to appreciate his moral anchorage in the noontide of the British anti-slavery movement. It is the key to explain why such a gentleman of wealth and standing would risk all to develop his bestial monkey man image of our ancestry in the first place, end quote. Now, we celebrate Darwin Day every year here at First Unitarian Society in February, which is his birthday month. One bit of trivia is that Charles Darwin and Abraham Lincoln were born on the same day in the same year, 1809. Of all the people we could be celebrating, why is it Charles Darwin? Well, for one thing, just before its founding in 1881 as a Unitarian congregation, the people who founded FUS were reading the works of Charles Darwin, because as freethinkers and proto-humanists, the founders of FUS realized that Darwin's insights concerning natural selection had fundamentally changed the human understanding of ourselves forever. For those willing to accept the science of natural selection, a new human reality had been born, one that offered at once the heady opportunity to reimagine ethics and society, and one that also offered humility as we began to understand that we are animals among animals, animals that will most likely never understand our reality except in partial and fragmentary ways. The 19th century readers of Darwin got a lot of things wrong, as would the readers in the 20th and the 21st centuries. Yes, Darwin was a person of his time. He was racist, sexist, elitist, and yes, Darwin's theories have been misapplied and misused. Yet the fundamental insight that all of nature, including human beings, is interconnected and interdependent, that message is more important now than ever. If anything saves Homo sapiens from itself, that's the insight that will do it. Our theme for the month of February is widening the circle, and Darwin's dangerous idea widens the circle all the way out. Everything with DNA is one flesh. The publication of Darwin's Origin of Species in 1859 turned both the scientific and theological worlds upside down, at least for traditional Christians. At last, the theory had bridged the gulf between the material world and the world of spirit or consciousness. Anyone inclined to think it through understood the implication of natural selection for the place of the human in the grand scheme of things. The conclusion had to be that the scheme is grand, but human beings are not grand to the scheme. Even though this is the almost inevitable conclusion based on Origin of Species, many wanted Darwin to say it explicitly. And in 1871, Darwin published his book, The Descent of Man. In that book, Darwin says it explicitly, quote, "The difference in mind between man and the higher animals, great as it is, certainly is one of degree and not of kind," end quote. It's important to notice what Darwin was saying there. The difference between human intelligence and the intelligence of other animals is one of degree. We have the same sort of intelligence, the same sort of consciousness as all other animals. Consciousness is a continuum. This would not have come as a surprise realization to those who lived before Christianity or who live outside of its influence. Many earth-centered traditions see the earth not as a static, unchanging thing, but as a continuous process. The earth is alive. All living things are conscious and connected. Native Americans, for instance, tended to consider all animals, including themselves, as siblings, the two-leggeds and the four-leggeds, as the phrasing went. The Stoic philosopher and so-called pagan Marcus Aurelius wrote, quote, "Always keep in mind the nature of the universe and the nature of your own nature, and how the one relates to the other, and what being a part of the entire universe means. Remember that no one can stop you from doing and saying those things which are your part in the universe," end quote. The nature of the universe and the nature of your own nature. Previous to monotheism, most human beings saw the reality in that way. But those affected by monotheism have had a difficult time getting back to that understanding. It's a realization in the poem by the contemporary American poet Margaret Atwood called All Bread. A little bit of it goes like this. All bread is made of wood, cow dung, packed brown moss, the bodies of dead animals, the teeth and backbones, what is left after the ravens. This dirt flows through the stems and into the grain and into our arms. Lift these ashes into your mouth, your blood. To know what you devour is to consecrate it, almost. All bread must be broken so that it can be shared. Together we eat this earth, end quote. This ancient wisdom had been mostly suppressed by European Christianity, though the idea stayed alive among intellectuals and practitioners of folk religions. For example, Spinoza wrote about natura naturans, nature naturing. Nature naturing. Nature for Spinoza was everything, self-arising, self-perpetuating. Darwin's theory of natural selection demonstrated how nature went about doing that naturing. But Darwin's theory went beyond merely explaining how living things got here. It also explained how instincts are shaped by interactions with our environment. Darwin wrote, quote, "The social instincts lead an animal to take pleasure in the society of its fellows, to feel a certain amount of sympathy with them, and to perform various services for them," end quote. The implications of that sentence are profound. For example, Dr. Michael Tomasello, a professor of psychology and neuroscience at Duke University, in his recent book, A Natural History of Human Morality, brings this insight to human ethics, postulating that first we human beings learned to cooperate, then we created morality based on that cooperation. Dr. Tomasello writes, quote, "It is inconceivable that you would ever see two chimpanzees carrying a log together," end quote. The human ability to cooperate in shared intentionality, as he calls it, is what makes us different. Not brain size, not walking upright, not being descended from or created by a god. Rather, our ability to cooperate when foraging and hunting created the morality of the group, and then the social norms of the group. These social norms, Tomasello writes, have often been declared the will of the gods. Collaborative behavior leads to social organization and to ethical norms, and eventually to complex moral codes that many people attribute to one god or another. As Darwin wrote, quote, "A moral being is one who is capable of reflecting on his past actions and their motives, of approving of some and disapproving of others," end quote. According to Darwin's idea, we are all moral beings because we are capable of reflecting on our past actions and their motives and drawing conclusions from that reflection. History too often gets told very badly. One consequence of that is that we tend to know so few instances of individuals making a difference, and that can lead to us feeling powerless to affect the future. But that is an illusion created by the wrong way of telling history. There are notable exceptions, but those are marginalized as alternative histories. Now think about a short history lesson concerning the Great Depression and the New Deal. No doubt it would mention Franklin Roosevelt, who was president, right? Maybe a couple of the cabinet secretaries along the way. But what about those millions of voters who voted for that? What about the thousands of federal employees who actually made the New Deal work? Not to mention the thousands of activists out on strike and out on the street pushing for the progressive change that the New Deal partially embraced. The way history is taught communicates the idea that only great and famous people move history, and that just isn't the case. Just as we human beings are naturing, as Spinoza put it, we are also historying. All of us are part of an oscillating loop creating the human reality at every moment. Charles Darwin and his theory of natural selection is a good example of this. Many people know Darwin's name and what he did, and a long list of predecessors, maybe, other people who had been thinking about evolution over time, but consider a group called the Aborigines Protection Society. It later joined the Anti-Slavery Society, which still exists today. The Aborigines Protection Society was a group formed in 1837 to protect the rights of native peoples from the horrors of European colonization. They were a religiously motivated group that used as their motto the Latin phrase ab uno sanguine, of one blood. Now that phrase occurs in Christian scripture. It's in the book of Acts. It says, "God that made the world and all things therein, seeing that the Lord of heaven and earth dwelleth not in temples made of hands, neither is worshipped with men's hands as though he needed anything, seeing he giveth to all life and breath and all things, and hath made of one blood all nations of men, for to dwell on the face of this earth, and hath determined the times before appointed and the bounds of their habitation." Of one blood. Now, why is this passage important? Because for the people of the Aborigines Protection Society, it meant that all of humanity was descended from Adam and Eve, which meant, in their minds, that all people had equal human rights, period. Therefore, slavery was clearly wrong. Damaging other cultures was clearly wrong. Colonizing the planet was clearly wrong. Now, that sounds like a no-brainer to many of us today, but it wasn't so clear in Darwin's time. It was a minority opinion. The theory that all of humanity came from common ancestors is known as monogenism. And I can't say it too fast because I get confused. Monogenism. In the 1830s, that was a position of some radical Christians and people belonging to things like the Aborigines Protection Society. Now, many scientists of the time were polygynists, meaning they thought that human beings came from different forebears and were therefore different species. This was the underpinning for some very ugly, dangerous theories concerning race, and it bolstered the prejudice that there are superior and inferior races. I should mention that there are still polygynists out there today, despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. But in Darwin's time, that belief was widespread. So, where did Darwin get his conviction that all of life evolved from one common ancestor? Yes, his theory points in that direction, but how was it that Darwin, in opposition to all the science of his time, was prepared to pursue the direction of a common ancestor for all living things? Might have been the influence of his wife, Emma Wedgwood Darwin, who came from a family of abolitionists. It might have been his grandfather, Erasmus Darwin, a poet who once wrote, quote, "Go, proud reasoner, and call the worm thy sister," end quote. Might it have been the Aborigines Protection Society, or maybe even the Bible? We do know that Darwin planned to be a priest, after all. Or probably it was all of the above. We will never know for sure, yet we know there were influences to influence him, and it's really a lost history because we tell that story badly. No, great ideas and great actions aren't the sole purview of the rich, the powerful, or the famous. The world and the future belong to all of us. All of us related as we are, as Darwin told us, to everything else from marmosets to magnolia trees. Darwin's dangerous idea eventually, in our own time, did the one blood thing of the Aborigines Protection Society one better. We are all one DNA. As Darwin said, as soon as you realize that one species could evolve from another, the whole structure wobbles and collapses. The whole structure wobbles and collapses, meaning religion, nation, hierarchy, patriarchy, meritocracy, racism, speciesism, and on. If we listen, the theory of natural selection calls us back to seeing living things as two-leggeds and four-leggeds. Calls us back to see the match between the nature of the universe and the nature of our own nature, as Marcus Aurelius put it. It calls us home to knowing these things. As Atwood said in the poem, all bread is made of wood, cow dung, packed brown moss, the bodies of dead animals, the teeth and backbones, what is left after the ravens. This dirt flows through the stems into the grain, into the arm. Darwin's dangerous idea is dangerous because it calls us back and calls us home to relationship with all things. That is the call, I think, that can save us yet. See it, know it, and we become at home in the universe. Our extinguishing the chalice words. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. All of these we carry in our hearts and in our minds until we are together again. Thanks, Paul. Our closing words are by Maya Angelou from her poem Continue. My wish for you is that you continue to be who and how you are, to astonish a mean world with your acts of kindness. Continue to dare to love deeply and risk everything for the good thing. Continue to float happily in the sea of infinite substance which set aside riches for you before you had a name. Continue. So may it be. Thank you all for coming today. All right. Thanks a lot. Thanks for being here. Thanks for